But at any rate, I'll just start with the opening spiel, be a little bit less structured than usual, but I just basically want to say that, I mean, we are here, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you know, a lot of things that we've been talking about for quite some time in terms of the sort of many crises that we're in simultaneously, right? We're in an ecological crisis, we're in a social crisis, we're in a crisis of capitalist production, we're in all of this. And it was no guarantee that people at the center, I mean, people at the periphery, of course, have been dealing with any number of elements of the crisis for a long time, right? But it was never any guarantee that it wouldn't sort of migrate to the center, if that makes sense, speaking in that Emmanuel Wallerstein sense. And I think I really want us to play with and assert the idea that this is neoliberalism Chernobyl for a couple of reasons. Did you guys watch Chernobyl on HBO? Did you guys watch that?
I'll be honest, I stayed away from it.
It was going to freak me out too much, honestly.
So
I'm down to be freaked out, but I heard some things that it was kind of like propagandistic, and I mean, I'm not a great television watcher anyway, and I avoided it for that reason. But you think
Matt was like, that's fucking propaganda. I'm gonna play Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly.
I don't want to watch anti-communist propaganda.
I mean, there's a couple missions you can make the case.
Car.
You can make the case that Grand Theft Auto is revolutionary with a couple of those missions, but we can move on from that.
Hey, you know what? I am, as a zero video game player, Grand Theft Auto is the only game that I ever tried to play. And I remember like when I don't, ages ago at this point, it was the only time where I was at a friend's house, we got high, and he introduced me to Grand Theft Auto, and I was actually relieved that I didn't have money at that moment to get a system, because I was like, I would play this all day. So
I've never thought to do it with weed before.
It was fun.
Oh yeah,
yeah, man. Hey, self-isolation tip. So I can't believe it. By the way, how are we in a world where I thought to do something with weed and you didn't?
Well,
at any rate, it was a good series. It was incredibly well produced, and I'll leave it for other people to sort of litigate the various points of it. I think it's historically undeniable that the Soviet leadership obviously tried to cover and lie in a way to protect themselves politically, and it put people's lives at risk. And the big propaganda on the show was not that happened historically. The big propaganda was the idea that big systems lying about people, lying and putting people in jeopardy is some type of intrinsic to communism thing. Mm-hmm. That's a fantasy. That is of our imaginative lives. That's part of the deep, deep ideological training we've got into to be where we are today. And I think if we look at just the United States, the Trump administrations, I think we can absolutely call criminal negligence with regards to this crisis. Rejecting help from the WHO, not being honest about the scale of it out of the gate, giving mixed information. And then, of course, the whole preceding journey to get here, right? The classic story of neoliberalism, which let's just get really specific about again. Starting in the 1970s, this is a project of political backlash. It's explained in a sort of popular sense of the Keynesian model wore itself out, and we needed to liberalize markets. We needed to make it easier for capital to move around. We needed less regulation and so on. And there's some truth to that. But the other very specific thing that David Harvey points out, and David Harvey really is my kind of guide to neoliberalism as a concept, not just like a buzzword we throw around, is that this is a political backlash, which we can trace to things like the Powell memo. Matt, what's the Powell memo?
I am actually not that great on the Powell memo.
You're not that great on the Powell memo. Well, anyways, no. The Powell memo is a document, I think it came out in the early 70s. It was a guy who went on to, or late 60s, he would go on to serve in the Nixon administration. I believe he was a Supreme Court pick. And it was basically like, the left is getting too strong. They're getting too strong economically in terms of labor. They're getting too strong in terms of broad social equity demands, feminism, civil rights movement. We need to counteract this. And so when you think about neoliberalism, you have to think of it as not just this sort of like, this is why distinction making around something just being a natural thing, like the sun sets or rises, versus like politics, which is something we as humans decide, or certain humans decide and other humans don't decide. The rhetoric of neoliberalism, the rhetoric of unregulated capitalism is this is just a natural force. It's almost like mystical. And we have figured it out, and we have learned to not get in its way. And if we don't get in its way, it will give us a huge amount of wealth. And the truth of the matter is that Thomas Friedman, of all people, was much more honest about it in the 1990s. He said, if you want to succeed, you have to have something he called the golden straitjacket. And the golden straitjacket were the rules of the road for having a lightly regulated, anti-labor, globalized economy. And all of the stuff that goes along with this, attacking labor unions, gutting public health, all of these things, of which the UK has gone pretty far in. No one's gone as far as the United States. And the Europeans, for all of their problems, we're seeing in the last couple of days, they have more basic civilization and decency built in. The French are banning, rent payments and things like that. The Danish have come through with an incredible stimulus and safety program. It's really the United States and the UK, and most extremely the United States, where we are just seeing essentially no response and almost essentially begging Walmart and CVS to figure out a way of getting us out of a global calamity, which threatens so many people's lives and obviously is going to cause extraordinary economic hardship. So what I want to say is that, yes, and here we go. Spain has nationalized all of its private hospitals as the country goes on coronavirus lockdown. So I want us to play, though, with that model of Chernobyl and neoliberalism. And this is the kind of top line thoughts. We're going to be doing a lot more on this on the show, because I actually think, of course, that show was on some sense, kind of crude anti-socialist propaganda. It was also very well produced, very well acted, and terrifying. And of course, again, this isn't a show that's going to romanticize the Soviet Union. So it identified, profound crimes done by the Soviet government of that time. But I want to go on offense, and I want to say, if we took not communism, not socialism, and frankly, this crisis doesn't indict all market activity or all markets. I think we need to actually start to distinguish between markets and capitalism, frankly. I think that's something we're going to need to get a lot more thoughtful about. They are not the same thing. And I'll just say, when we confuse markets and capitalism is like a whole mode of production, right? That allows like silly propagandists for unfettered capitalism that's destroying everything to be like, hey, what? You don't like your farmer's market or your local bookstore?
Yeah.
And that's what none of us are talking about.
Well, it dehistoricizes and naturalizes capitalism, because markets have been around way longer than capitalism.
Exactly. And so what I want to say is, if we were to say the Chernobyl indicted a part of the failings of the Soviet Union, and obviously there's many other things about the Soviet Union that were actually great successes, and we need to have a more complex conversation about it. But it was a major, huge catastrophe, and it played a role of many of the complete delegitimization of that government. That's the truth. And I want to say this is the same moment for neoliberalism. Now, it's on top of many, many moments. This should have been the moment in 2008 when Wall Street wiped out trillions of dollars of wealth, when we had an administration come to power on the heels of both a certain type of cultural hope and optimism, and also just the absolute betrayal of Wall Street, promising something different. And all they did was recapitalize banks and have a 10-year recovery through Obama and Trump, which is ending now, that did nothing but line the pockets of the ultra wealthy and further create a new hoarder industry in Silicon Valley. I want to say now, as we're reminded of how precarious life is, not just because of political and economic systems, but like literally, We all know folks that are old. I know people, very close to me dealing with stuff like evictions. It's evil, it's terrifying, and this system is not equipped to deal with it. And that is not a normative statement, that's an objective statement. And so I want this to be a big ideological point and shift, not just for us to protest and repeat and score points on, but for us to actually sit with the reality of it, that this moment is over. I don't know what comes next. We'll talk about that more. But we're done with it.
I think that what we've been seeing, just almost like on like a psychoanalytic level, of the role of the corporation in our lives in response to this crisis. I mean, the fact that Trump was at the Rose Garden with the CEO of Walgreens, and they were using it as an infomercial, was definitely like a very frightening thing, and it's it's very comical. But I mean, open up your inbox. How many people got statements from a myriad of different CEOs? And of course, like, these are massive parts of our economy. So it does matter, what Grubhub is planning to do in response to the coronavirus. I'm not saying that that's not necessarily important, but the fact that there's actually a disconnect between like actually just like kind of public communal spaces that are reaching out to us and this private sphere. And it's been a very weird thing in this what we're calling social distancing moment that we've had over this past few days, to realize that for a lot of people, the communication, the majority of the communication that they're getting is still coming from corporate America and not from communities or families or social organizations. And it really, and that was the neoliberal project too, was to completely socially isolate us. And in a kind of perverse way, on a philosophical level, this is like the perfect crisis of neoliberalism, and that it actually has created us all as atomized individuals, or at least small families that we're stuck in our room. And it's going to be interesting to see. I think I agree with you completely, Michael, that this is a moment that I think it's a reckoning. It should have happened a lot earlier, but hopefully things become clear to people. And I'll talk about this later during the gem. But you'll see that a lot of people are realizing how inadequate our system is at taking care of people. Just going on Facebook, I've been seeing distant family members, people I don't really communicate with that much, really freaking out about the loss of income that's coming, and people are saying, well, how is it that we don't have any access or any kind of social safety net? And it's like, well, obviously this is something
somebody's been telling you, you dumb motherfuckers.
Exactly. So hopefully this is a wake-up call for a lot of people, and especially when it comes to the healthcare. And hopefully also too, because there's the political aspect, but on a human level, that like we're really able to build up those links. I listened to the New York Times podcast this morning, I know, but it was actually a really sweet one, the devastating one about the doctors in Italy. They interviewed a doctor who had been basically on the front lines outside of Milan, dealing with the coronavirus, and the horrifying decision that you have to make as an individual there. It just really made it clear to me how much of a crisis this is, and how we really need to be there for each other. And this is a very unique moment in that this is a global crisis. Capitalism has been a global crisis for a long time, but this is a very apparent crisis that we're all experiencing at the same time together. So hopefully we can continue to build those links too internationally, because they're very much needed.
They're here on this show. It's pretty moving to see people from literally all continents kind of like reach out and say that there's, some relationship. It has to be obviously way bigger and more systemic than this, but the impulse is there, is my point. You have something you want to add to that, Matt?
Not really. David, just watch your shirt on that mic a little bit. It scratches slightly.
Thank you, Matt.
There you go.
Christ, David.
No, it's fine. It was good.
Don't mess up the social isolation show. Come on.
I think it's just it does feel like an era's like we've hopefully, but it feels like we've changed an era. Like the idea that a capitalist would own a hospital is something that I think most people would think is a bit silly nowadays, right? Like, especially like the example of the Philadelphia hospitals that Bernie like campaigned to keep open. Now those, like, clearly we need those beds.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, yeah, And that's also another, I always got to be, I want to be careful about this, but like right now, stay put, stay at home, be safe, don't mess around, 1000%. But don't get used to this either. You know, because I think David, you're completely right. I mean, on that, there, in the sense that I'm talking about in terms of public health, in terms of systems collapse, in terms of human life, this is a distillation that this whole model is a catastrophe for human well-being and we need to stop, right?
Mhm.
And from the perspective of the neoliberal model, let's have people that we've already, you know, have decided aren't really human anyways, to come get us our food. Did Emma just jump on?
She just joined us. Yeah.
I didn't even realize that I could, once I click join, that I would just be on air.
Well, welcome.
Emma's like, I'm not waiting.
Hey guys, keep
Hey, Emma.
doing what you're doing.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.